Hello and welcome to Liquid New Hampshire. This is the second episode with my second guest, Mr. Joe Alexander Jr. It's nice to have you on, Joe.
Dominic, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And I just realized today that we're neighbors. So I guess you got to start local, right?
We are. We're so local that I can walk to your house.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I wanted to have you on to talk about real world experience being a legislator and the real practice of drafting and passing legislation. Specifically, one issue that I've been sort of reading about is pork. You hear sometimes in the news, politicians will complain about a bill being packaged with other bills and pushed through, or the other definition of pork, because there's kind of two definitions of pork. Is one is when a bill gets packaged to get pushed through. The other is when they're looking to take home something for their specific local area that maybe doesn't benefit everybody on a broader level. And I was wondering if, for one thing, if you see a lot of pork on the state level as a legislator, and for another thing, how you feel about its role in our government.
Well, so first of all, I this is my third term. I'm on the ballot for my fourth term. Um, and I've realized recently that a lot of time it's how the sausage is made, like pork wise, because if you see I could introduce a bill, for instance, great example. I introduced a bill that would put a timeline on Department of Transportation to sign driveway permits. Because to me, I think like government should not be the inhibitor to expanding housing. Like if they're taking too long to sign a driveway permit, like there's an issue. So I put a bill in there, and it passed the House with flying colors, and then it was amended in the Senate. And I was like, okay, I'm okay with the changes the Senate made. But then the Senate held it hostage and attached, because they knew that I cared about it and I'm in leadership on the other side. So they attached a bill that they cared about onto it so that they could get their bill through. And what ended up happening is that you'd have like driveway permitting with like children's scholarships with there's like a bunch of different things together that have nothing to do with each other. And we end up going to a committee of conference, and if you're familiar with those are, that's four House members and three senators, and we sit down and we're like, okay, so like where can we compromise,
Okay.
and ask the committee of conference report. But you know I got my driveway permits, right? Like DOT has to sign a driveway permit now within 60 days.
Okay.
So like so I got what I wanted, right? Like we're trying to make government like more efficient and like more responsive to you. But we also got like some disability scholarships for it, something like that. Like I didn't even know like the other part of it. I was like, okay, I guess this is something that the senator from Bedford really likes. So we just went ahead with it. So a lot of times it's how the sausage is made, right? Like people use it as a strategy to get what they want through.
Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard specifically when it goes to the Senate, sort of the repackaging of the bill. Is it usually the case in New Hampshire that stuff will seemingly fly through the House and then get bogged down in the Senate?
Well, so the interesting thing about the New Hampshire House is with 400 members, like we can't be controlled by like lobbyists or special interests or like you know what I mean, like there's 400 of us, so it's really expensive to buy off the entire house, right? Like there's no way you could do it. There's 24 senators, so 24 senators have different interests in different things, and different lobbyists have different ears. So at the end of the day, the Senate is actually more often than not the culprit when they package all the bills together and send them over to us, because they have their issues that they care about, that their specific towns care about, things like that. Another great example is I was part of a bill that would say that municipalities uh, can't mandate more than one parking space per unit, because I believe that the free market is going to determine how many parking spaces are needed, and if you require too much parking, then that's less units that can be built, right? Like two parking spaces is a studio apartment. So you think of like if a town says you need two parking spaces per one bedroom unit, like that seems a little ridiculous. So the
Mm.
parking bill goes in and it passes the House, right? And then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate attaches on a housing omnibus that gives like tax incentives for like apartment to, or I'm sorry, office to residential commercial, like conversion. They added on something about squatting, like squatting at a property. Like it ended up being where like the the bill was like 15 pages long
Yeah.
when we passed a one paragraph bill. So um, I ended up chairing that committee of conference, and I was like, you know what, like we're okay with all these things, but our position is we definitely need the parking, and that was something that the Senate didn't want. So the negotiation kind of got together where we ended up getting a final product, but it had squatting, office conversions, it had parking, it had so much stuff in it. Um, so, but all this stuff happens towards the end of the term, right? Because everybody has their little issues, and a bill might die like in one body, but it gets revived in another body until we run out the clock. So it's just it's interesting. And you say pork, and I would agree with you, but I think a lot of it is how that's how legislation is made. That's how you get things done.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, would you say that is this a is this a bipartisan thing, or is there more resistance to this type of legislation on the right than on the left?
It's both parties that do it. I mean, with regards to the housing policy that I was chairing, I had a Democratic senator that I was working with, and she's a really good friend of mine, and she's a great senator. Um, we collaborate a lot on housing policy, so like we'll compare notes. I think it really is like it's a across all parties. I mean, there is a large like population of Republican House members that don't like this sort of stuff. But I believe that in order to be really effective, you need to be open to the possibilities of getting your language through like the non-traditional way, non-traditional.
So would you say then that a lot of what is maybe getting called pork is in fact bipartisanship in action?
Yeah, I mean a lot of the like so for instance, I've been a champion for housing because you're my age, right? Are you I'm like 29.
Yeah, I'm 25.
Okay, so I really feel like
That's impressive.
thank you. Well, I feel like the problem we have is people our age cannot find somewhere to live, and we don't have the same opportunities that our parents and grandparents had. Like my grandmother could buy a house for $4,000 in the 70s, and that's just like completely like unobtainable in today's world. So I've really taken this on as like an issue that I really care about. Um, so with regards to that, you lose like a little bit of people on the right and you lose people on the left. And then you end up getting a coalition together of Republicans that really care about property rights and they like want to do whatever they want on their property. And then Democrats that are like progressive and they're like, okay, like this isn't fair for young people. Like we need to. So I end up like politics makes strange bedfellows where you end up like working with um people you would completely vote differently on guns, right? Like, but they end up being your strongest ally with housing. So it's really interesting, like the bipartisan work that gets done.
Absolutely. So that sounds like you answered my question very thoroughly on pork, actually. That leads me to my next question. I was watching at one point, Marjorie Taylor Greene had talked about voting in real life, people actually showing up to vote. This was obviously on the national level in Congress. And I was watching a liberal commentator discuss it, and their view was sort of, oh, well, she's a freshman legislator. She doesn't know what she's talking about. It's ridiculous to ask people to show up for every single bill. And that left me with like a lingering question of, oh, is it ridiculous? Should people be showing up more in person and debating and discussing the bills, or is it kind of good that we have people only showing up for the bills they're really passionate about?
Well, so in New Hampshire, every single bill gets a public hearing and every single bill gets a floor vote. So, for instance, if I wanted to introduce something to make um, the tulip the state flower, that would get a public hearing and that would get a vote in committee and then it'd get a vote on the House floor. So it ends up being where like literally anything you want to introduce, you can get a member of the House on the record if they support it or not. Because a lot of other states, like if the committee chair doesn't think that the bill has any merit, they just won't introduce it. But in New Hampshire, every single bill gets introduced. So that's what's good is like we have like probably in New Hampshire one of the most direct democracies, having 400 members, and there's some crazy bills introduced, like, and everybody gets a floor vote. So that's really been interesting. With regards to like showing up to vote, I very much think that every member should show up to vote. I don't like proxy voting. I don't like hybrid voting. I don't like any of that stuff because I think like if we expect people to go to work or like leave the house to do something, like we should have to do it. Like we're the most accountable. We have to be accountable to the people, and the only way you can be accountable is if you show up. And the a funny story in 20 my first term, second year, was COVID.
Okay.
It,
Wow. Yeah.
second term, the first year, it was COVID. So we ended up transitioning to committee hearings and committee votes over Zoom.
Mm.
Um, and the votes were optional whether to be in person or not, but the committee hearings were all over Zoom. So you would find like your state reps, like if it's on Zoom, like half the state reps would have their camera off and their audio off. So it's like there's a member of the public speaking to you and your camera's off and you're not like actively engaged in the meeting. Like to me, that seems like really rude, right? Like we need to be accountable. So if we can somehow overcome that sort of thing, maybe, but I believe strongly like in order to really engage with somebody, it needs to be in person.
I like that. I like that a lot. I also like that you mentioned, even if we're just changing like the state flower or something sort of symbolic like that, it usually has to go through multiple layers of public approval. Do you think, while you support in-person voting, do you think maybe the multiple layers of approval, is that too bureaucratic? Does that slow things down, or is that really good for accountability?
Well, there's ways to speed it up, I think. You know, I think there are changes that need to be made to the state house, like the way we function, because um, people our age, it's really hard to serve. Like, we get paid $100 a year. So I'm not saying we need to pay all the state reps more money, but you know, who says we can't have like public hearings at 7 o'clock at night instead of 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, right? Like when people are working. For me, I'm a bartender, so I can work like nights and weekends and then still be at the state house during the day. That's how I make it work. But a lot of young people can't because they're just starting out. So you end up dealing with something where everybody, the average age is like 68.
Yeah,
So
mostly.
like people, young people in the state house. So, why can't we have house session on a Saturday? What's stopping us from meeting on Saturday?
Yeah.
Nothing. So there's some changes we can do to make it easier for young people to serve. And I think that'll help, Republicans and Democrats. I think it's really important to have a diverse range of like representation in the House. So that's
So
what I would propose.
would you also support paying the legislators?
I voted against that consistently. So this is um this is in the Constitution. So we get paid $100 a year. And back in the 1780s, that was probably like a lot of money. But now it's just nothing. Like, you go out to eat, it's $100. So um I wouldn't support doing that because I think it's really important that we have like the citizen legislator. And I think when you start getting paid, you stop you stop feeling like you're accountable to people. I look at like Massachusetts where it's like you're making like I think like $80,000 a year to be
Okay.
a legislator. And like are you meeting all the time? Are you working a full-time job that you get deserve to get paid $80,000? Like I don't know. Like I don't know what it's like to be a mass legislator, but um, New Hampshire, I yeah, I just don't support raising the salary of it. It also would take a vote to change the Constitution, so that's a pretty high bar in New Hampshire. It's like 67% of
Yeah,
people vote.
the supermajority, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, actually, so that brings me to another issue. Because we have sort of a citizens legislature, I'm wondering about how capable the average state rep is of sort of just reading the bills. Because my understanding is a lot of times bills will be very, very long. And a lot of times that's how lobbyists would get influence is, they'll just tell you, oh, you don't have to read all that. Don't worry, I'm sure the bill is fine.
Well, so a couple things. The first thing is lobbyists do have a little bit more power in New Hampshire. And I would say it's because there's three Republican staffers for 200 members, and there's three Democrat staffers for 200 members. So it ends up being where like we just don't have time to read every single bill. So sometimes members will lean on lobbyists for specific things. Like, if you're generally pro police, you're going to call the police lobbyist and be like, so what does this bill do? Right.
Right.
Um, the second thing is, though, is that we have different committees. And the idea is that we rely on those committees with like certain issues. So I serve on judiciary. That was my third term on judiciary. So we deal with landlord tenant law, public's right to know, civil rights, civil liberties, abortion law. Like we deal with all that stuff on judiciary. So like the committee will make a recommendation. And so somebody on, commerce committee is going to be like, okay, the judiciary committee 20-0 thinks that this bill is a good bill. So do I have to read the bill or have the experts in that area thoroughly vetted the bill? And for the most part, they do. There are some times where the House disagrees with a committee. It's very rare though. So um, for not getting paid like any money, it's hard to go in and read every single bill line for line. My advice is just try to be an expert in the issue areas on your committee. So right to know. I do a lot of stuff with like landlord tenant law, housing law, stuff like that. So I end up being like the expert in that area where other members will come to me and be like, what do you think about this?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
kind of how we make it work.
I was actually wondering how you felt. That was one of my next questions, was how you felt about the committee system and the sort of level of delegation that happens there. Because I think an argument could probably be made that it's a little bit technocratic or anti-democratic in a sense, that only a small handful of people are actually deliberating a particular bill. Like you said, the judiciary focuses on stuff related to the judiciary, whereas are there bills that aren't so much the issue of any particular committee, but are more general bills?
I mean, they get assigned, like every bill gets assigned to a committee. But, like I said, later in the cycle, when the Senate attaches three different bills that have nothing to do with the original bill, now you need now you need members from various committees to get together and be like, okay, what does this actually do? We also have a system where we have like committee reports on every bill. So um, it's in the calendar every single week. The calendar comes out on Thursdays, and it basically gives like the committee reports on, if the vote was 18-3, the people, somebody from the side of the 18 will write why they think the bill should pass, right? And then the three, somebody from the three side, if they want to like put up a stink on the floor and debate it, they would also write why the bill's bad. So you end up getting where like instead of reading the whole bill, you can read like the report from the majority and the minority, and then you can use that to make your decision. So that's usually what I do when I go in and make votes. If it's a really controversial bill like marijuana or something, like I'll go in and read it and be like, what does this actually do? But a lot of times I rely on committees to vet the bills and look at them. And for by and large, you do rely on your party members too on those committees to make sure that you know your position is being pushed. But there's, like I said, there's sometimes committees get things wrong. So all these votes have to go on the floor anyways.
That was a great answer. Yeah. So another question I had was, it sounds like a lot of this is there's a lot of camaraderie, it sounds like actually. But one of the questions I wanted to ask is there anything unseemly? Is there any legislative processes that you sort of on principle don't want to engage in? Any tricky, oh, somebody snuck this into the bill and we didn't want that to be done that way?
Um, so I have a lot of really great friends on both sides of the aisle. One of my first friends was Cam Kenny. He was a state rep from Durham. He's like 2 years younger than me. He was a UNH college student, then ran for state rep. He's not running again. I'm actually very sad about it. Like really Republicans don't have an opportunity to win in Durham, right? Like usually the Democrats win because of it's just a strong Democrat stronghold. But like I just love making connections with members that are there for, an extended period of time where like I can collaborate them on policy when we agree. Um, for instance, that parking bill, I was working really closely with state rep Rebecca McWilliams in Concord, and she was a Democrat. She was elected as a Democratic rep when I was first elected as well. And now she's running for Senate in Concord. So, but we ended up working together on this bill and we finally got it done and we like went out back and hugged and like it was a really great time to like be able to like, work on one issue and get it done. Knowing that we're not going to agree on energy policy, so I've really tried not to take things personal. Like when people vote against what your position is, like they have their own interests. Like they were elected by different people. Like, it trick is not to take it personal because someday you might need them for something, and you want to build bridges, not burn them.
Absolutely. That's a good philosophy. Let's see here. Oh yeah, yeah, that was another question I had was sometimes in a budgetary process. A good example is I talked to John Kuiper on my first interview and
Yep.
had a proposal regarding cannabis where he thought we could take it under sort of state ownership, like the Liquor Commission, and put the money into affordable housing. And in that conversation, he talked about how sort of setting the money aside for housing in that way might be a good way to guarantee that it goes to housing. How do you feel about, in the budgetary process, making priorities like that and sort of setting it aside for a specific cause as opposed to debating the budget at large?
I mean, we really do that. So, like, there was a bill, it died, but I support it. This is where I sided with Democrats, was to add 5 million more dollars into the affordable housing fund through the real estate transfer tax. So currently it's at 5 million, and it would go to 10 million if the bill passed. And that wasn't something we got through. It was kind of close, but there I think that is a solution to the housing crisis. But if you look by and large, the issues are happening on the local level where you have local government tyrants basically telling you what you can and can't do with your own property. And to me, I see that as being like, if you don't have your right to your own property, like what do you have a right to? Right? Like if you don't have a right to build another like an accessory dwelling unit out back because your mother is aging and you don't want to live with her, but you want to keep an eye on her, let her have her independence, but the town is telling you you can't do it, like that's a problem, right? Like you own the property. So um I I hate to necessarily invest a ton of money into the affordable housing stuff because I think it happens through less regulation, specifically on the town level. But there's also, like I said, with regarding driveway permits, there's state level issues that you can, try to make things happen quicker. So yes, yes, we need to invest more, but we also need to cut the red tape. So that's kind of why I like, and John Kipper, he's running for governor, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So and
So I think.
yeah, chair of the special committee on housing, and he's come in and testified in my committee, and I actually agree with a lot of his positions on housing. And this is what we talked about: is like it's a right and left. It's not really a party thing. So um, yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, housing, like putting housing as an issue aside for the moment, how do you feel about the budgetary process of setting aside funding as a priority like that? Like, is it better to build a budget from the top down, looking at all of the factors? Or is it better to, when the time comes and a bill passes, like the cannabis legalization he was talking about, to set that money aside for a specific cause? Like, I'll give you another example. John Oliver, I was watching recently, was talking about some money that the national government won in opioid legislation, right? There was a lawsuits done against some opioid manufacturers like Pfizer, and the money was supposed to be set aside for specifically addiction treatment programs, and it was being put into the broader budget for broader budget losses. How do you feel about that sort of an issue?
A lot of the monetary things that happen are on finance. Like you end up pulling, you know, we don't pass a bill if it doesn't have any money. That's typically what I've done is like I wouldn't like support a bill if it's $3 million if there's no surplus money, right? Like and all the bills that we pass have to go into the biennial budget. So um I find that the first year, the budget year, is really important because any spending you really want to get done would happen in the first year. Um, there's kind of this unwritten thing where usually we don't pass spending bills in the second year because, like I said, unless there's a surplus, like um, there's no way to fund the bill. So we don't want to, leave our state officials with like a mandate and then like not give them any resources for it. So typically, I haven't supported a lot of spending bills in the second year. But like if a good example of what we did is Keno. So part of the profits of Keno go towards like education,
Mhm.
right? That's that's just how we set up the system. So like marijuana, for instance, or cannabis, when that's legalized, like some of the profits of that will go towards enforcement and some will go towards treatment and things like that. So I mean, I think it's completely fine to do something like that, as long as you're like making target investments to important things. It's really up to the legislature to make that call.
Got it. And it sounds like maybe it's also often a fiscally responsible choice because it keeps the spending, the decision to spend and the decision to tax close together. That way you're not spending money you don't have.
Yes. Well, theoretically, yes. Hopefully, we don't.
Let me see. I think you may have already answered all of my questions. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that was actually all of the questions I had for you. You did a great job and breezed right through
So
them.
tell me about your you said liquid democracy. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. So, liquid democracy is a proposal. It comes out of Iceland originally, and they started a party in Iceland called the Pirate Party. There are some members here in New Hampshire and down in Massachusetts. I actually plan on having them as a guest fairly soon. The Pirate Party, they wanted to create a system of e-democracy, so it would be like through your phone, through your computer, and it would allow people to vote on issues directly if they choose to. But it wouldn't be pure direct democracy because they allow you to delegate your votes to other people. So, kind of like how within the legislature we delegate a lot to various specific committees to focus on specific issues. And at some point, a decision needs to be made of which committee to give that issue to. In a similar way, liquid democracy, you would delegate to specific experts on issues you care about. It appears that we are running out of recording time. We have about 10 minutes left. Just thought I'd
Problem.
do that.
No problem. I was really curious about that. That's an interesting idea. I just worry about like maybe like being prone to hacking and things like that. Like, have they ran into that?
Yes, so that is one of the initial problems they had was some of the concerns to me didn't make a ton of sense. One of the biggest concerns was privacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Loss of people's privacy. If you're voting directly from your phone, it might be possible for people to figure out who you voted for, which can be dangerous. My understanding from reading the book on liquid feedback, which is the name of the software itself, is that they've accounted for that within the software because they ran into that issue so early on. But the other big issue that they talked about that I thought didn't sound like a very smart concern was people buying votes. One of the concerns was, oh, it might be easier to buy people's votes off, just give people money and get them to vote for what you want if it's the general population. I think that logic is kind of inverted. I think it might be easier to buy a smaller number of people's votes than a larger number of people's votes. Um, but yeah, I don't want to implement it all at once, obviously. It would be a huge change. It would be a fundamental change to how we govern entirely. But I think that I want to get a group of people together who are interested in using the software, looking at getting businesses to use it in their corporate boards, and then looking at local governments and working our way up to see if we can get a local government to use this software. And if they have success with it, then maybe we can start scaling up to bigger scale institutions.
Awesome. Well, that's an interesting perspective. I'll keep that in mind. But thank you for the opportunity to do this. I'm happy to do it anytime. And
Is there
if you want to talk further, let me know.
like if you have a website or anything, was there anything you wanted to plug, or if you're running again?
Well, yeah, I'm running again. I really hope if there's people from Goffstown watching that they consider voting for me. I try not to be like this politician. Like I said, I'm a bartender, so I try to just be as relatable to people as possible. I'm really passionate about housing reform. So I just hope that you'll consider voting for me. If not September, but November.
Absolutely. I look forward to talking to you again in the future too.
Thank you, Dominic.
Have a good day.
You too.